Speaker, can I first of all congratulate the Honourable Member for Lancaster and Wyre on his very eloquent contribution today, and look forward to the many contributions which he'll make in the 4.5 years that he has ahead of him in this place before my former friends for his constituency return to the government benches where we will by then be. I rise, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for the first time in this place with some trepidation, following as I do in a long tradition of distinguished Conservative members of Parliament for North Wiltshire. I can, I think, claim on behalf of the constituency something of a record for longevity and continuity, in the sense that we have all of my three predecessors in North Wiltshire, stretching back to 1941, still alive. And I challenge any other honourable member in this House to equal that record if they can. That goes back to David Eccles, who won a by-election in 1941 when he took over from Captain Cazalet, who'd been killed piloting General Sikorsky during the last war. He served for nearly 20 years, was replaced by one of the great gentlemen of this place, Daniel Audrey, who served from 1962 through until he handed over the baton to Richard Needham in 1979. Richard has, of course, made a huge contribution to the nation, both in the Northern Ireland office and in the Department of Trade and Industry. And his wit and his particular brand of directness will be much missed by this House. I hope that I'm able to follow in that worthy tradition, if not in a lookalike sort of way, at least as well as I can. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm very, very honoured and fortunate to be elected for such a beautiful constituency as North Wiltshire. In the words of the English prayer book, the unchanging changelessness of rural England straddling the industrial prosperity of the M4 corridor. The most beautiful villages in England. I've got Laycock and Castle Combe, both in the constituency, surrounding pleasant market towns, 4 of them, Chippenham, Malmesbury, Corsham and Wootton Bassett. And those 4 towns house some of the finest businesses in England. The fastest growing business, I'm told, in Europe are Messrs. Dyson, who manufacture bagless vacuum cleaners in the town of Malmesbury, and first class they are. Those pleasant towns, but nonetheless, North Wiltshire is no longer, therefore, the rural idyll which some honourable members might imagine it to be. More than half of my constituents actually live in towns. But nonetheless, the whole character of the place comes from the fact that it is in the countryside. Even if you live in a modern estate in Chippenham, you believe that you are a countryman and your way of life is heavily influenced by the countryside. Many of us are therefore deeply concerned about 2 or 3 aspects of life in the countryside at this moment. First of all, of course, farmers have faced the most desperate 18 months in the history of modern agriculture, thanks to the BSE crisis. I very much hope that the government, who are so proud of their close links and their great power within the European Union, will now be able to lift the EU beef ban as soon as they possibly can. I have not yet to hear any promises or any aspirations from the government on that front, but they must take urgent action to lift the ban. I very much welcome the announcement which they made last week about banning the import of beef from possibly dodgy abattoirs in the continent of Europe, but would make just 2 comments about it. First of all, they might like to consider bringing that ban forward to today's date on the grounds that by making it to the end of July, there's quite a real risk that those dodgy abattoirs, I like to call them, will choose to pump poor beef into this country in the interim. The second thing they might like to consider would be using those excellent MAF vets who use their time touring British abattoirs and making sure that our beef is of the highest possible quality. They might like to ask those very same MAF vets to go to the continent and inspect the abattoirs from whom we will then be importing beef. And I suspect that we would find that the imports of beef in the United Kingdom went down quite considerably, and that even huge users like Messrs. McDonald's, who I believe are the largest users of beef in this country, might think twice about the determination to import everything which they use from the continent. Many of the members in this House, Mr. Deputy Speaker, know that British beef is best, and it's high time that McDonald's and others realise the same. Another area of threat, I think, to an area such as North Wiltshire comes from the possibly controversial area of field sports. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the economy of my constituency would be deeply damaged by any ban on field sports as a whole, but particularly on fox hunting. Something like £4,000 million is contributed to the British economy thanks to field sports. Something like 50,000 horses are kept purely for the purpose of fox hunting. Something like 15,500 foxhounds would have to be destroyed if fox hunting were banned. That, incidentally, being vastly more than the number of foxes which are killed in any one year. The immediate threat, as I understand it from recent comments from the Labour Party, is to hunting on Ministry of Defence land. And that would particularly affect my constituency because Salisbury Plain is just very slightly to the south of the constituency. And we have some experience there because 5 years ago, hunting across the impact area was banned for safety reasons. And within a very few years, the farmers got together a petition to petition the Ministry of Defence once again to allow hunting on the impact area because their lambs and their poultry were suffering such appalling depredations. That is a case study, and that case study would be repeated across the United Kingdom in the event that fox hunting were banned. Mr. Deputy Speaker, my particular concern with today's debate is that the political correctness of extending the very stringent bill which my right honourable friend, the member for the former Home Secretary, brought in last year, would extend perhaps ultimately to the area of field sports. Perhaps before talking about the bill, I should declare an interest. I was brought up in Dunblane, and my father was the minister of Dunblane Cathedral, and my mother was one of the doctors who took part in the counselling in the aftermath of the tragedy. I, therefore, perhaps more than many members, was deeply, deeply affected by the tragedy last year. My younger brother attended Dunblane Primary School. I, therefore, went to some length, despite the fact that I live in a field sports area during the whole of last year, to justify the bill which was brought in by my right honourable friend, the member for Folkestone and Hythe. And I can tell you that I came under some considerable pressure from the shooting lobby in North Wiltshire, who felt that I was not doing the right thing in supporting that bill. I'm conscious, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that in opposing the government's bill today, I will come under perhaps equal pressure from my friends and relations who still live in the town of Dunblane. I do so, therefore, intentionally and thoughtfully, and feeling deeply about the issue of Dunblane, and simply because I believe that this bill today will go nowhere at all towards preventing another such incident. I have a horrible feeling, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that this bill has a taint of self-righteousness about it, a taint of trying to appear to put something right rather than to put it right at all. We made sure in our bill this time last year that Dunblane could never again occur. This bill doesn't do that at all. This bill merely attempts to demonstrate to the public that the Labour Party are as concerned now about the aftermath of Dunblane as we were last year. And for that reason, I find the bill, speaking as a Dunblane boy, as somewhat distasteful. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I say, came under huge pressure last year from the gun lobby. I bore that pressure and I spoke up strongly in favour of my right honourable friend, the member for Hythe and Folkestone's bill. I feel deeply that I know that I will come under some pressure from my friends and my relations in Dunblane as a result of making my comments today. But I do feel terribly strongly about the rights of shooters to take part in the Olympic sport which this bill would ban. I do feel terribly strongly for the people who live and work in the gun factories, many of them represented by members opposite, who would be so fundamentally affected by this bill. It is for that reason that I've overcome my natural emotional inclination to support the bill, and that I very much hope that members opposite will join me this evening in the noes lobby.
Mr. Causey.